Today we were discussing the legislation of domestic violence within New Zealand.
On the 1st of April 2019, the Victims Protection Act 2018 came into force. This act was introduced by Green MP Jan Logie, which amends the Employment Relations Act 2000, Holidays Act 2003, and Human Rights Act 1993. The current legislation is the result of a vast development of multiple legislations over time, and it is important to review this development in order to get a better understanding of the current domestic violence leave legislation. Prior to the Victims Protection Act in 2018, there had been no requirements for employees to pay out any domestic violence leave.
To begin the critical discussion, we have split up the employer and employee views to analyse the difference that the new legislation has placed upon both parties. In 2019, the Domestic Violence Victim Protection Act was passed, in which new laws in regards to the request of 10-day paid domestic violence leave and a flexible working schedule of up to 2 months can be made by the employee. The legislation was an amendment to Domestic Violence Act 1995, the Employment Relations Act 2000 and the Holiday Act 2003, and it came into effect on the 1st of April 2019. The introduction of this amendment was to provide victims of domestic violence support in their personal lives and assist in a smooth transition when they return into the regular work. By providing employees with the conditions stated in the Employment Relations Act Amendment 2018, it allows employees to feel supported through a tough personal issue and assists them when they return to the workplace environment. There is a clause in the amendment that states that there are new regulations surrounding discrimination and domestic violence. The new legislation adds that domestic violence is a new area that is a prohibited area for employees to ask questions about in interviews and discriminate against potential new employees. This means that the topic of domestic violence is something that cannot be raised towards current or future employees at an organization. There are very similar regulations surrounding who is eligible for the employment right as there is for paid leave, sick leave, and bereavement leave. The employee needs to have had a constant employment at the organization for at least 6 months or worked an average of 10 hours per week if they're on a casual or non-permanent contract. The employer needs to make sure that the employee has met these requirements before they can process the request for flexible working or paid leave request. There are grounds for denial of the request, but the employers need to make sure that they meet certain criteria to ensure that it is a fair dismissal. Because this is a part of the Employment Relations Act 2000, there are consequences to the employers if they do not comply with the regulations stated in the Act. The organisation can be fined for up to $20,000 if they unfairly decline a request, and there is a potential for a personal grievance to be raised against the company if the employee feels it has been unfairly denied. Due to the regulations and requirements that need to be met in order to decline a request, the employer needs to be careful and thorough when making the decision.
By introducing this legislation, employees become entitled to 10 days of paid leave each year, short-term flexible working arrangements, and certain protections. The flexible arrangements consist of changes to their work routine, such as location, contact details, responsibilities at the workplace, hours that are assigned to them, and many more depending on the employee's role. An employee can only be entitled to short-term working arrangements for no longer than 2 months. When requesting for flexible working arrangements, if an employer has declined an employee's request or has not responded back within 10 working days, the employee has a right to go to a specialist service such as Employment New Zealand, Human Rights Commission, or the Employment Relations Authority. If an employee declines a domestic violence leave, refuses to pay for the leave, or treats the employee unfairly, it is considered as discrimination, and the employee therefore has the right to take advantage of the specialist services. When applying to Employment New Zealand, if an employee believes they have been treated unfairly, they must raise a personal grievance with the employer within 90 days. The employee has the right to seek mediation from Employment New Zealand or Human Rights Commission, in which both the employee and employer must agree to. If an employee's request to domestic violence leave is declined, it must reach out to the ERA within 6 months from the flexible working request, or 12 months from the domestic violence request. However, the employee must contact Employment Relations New Zealand first. In order for the employee to be eligible for the leave or flexible working conditions, the employee needs to have been employed at the organisation for a minimum of 6 months, or worked for an average of 10 hours per week for 6 months. The paid 10 leave days allocated for domestic violence replenish every 12 months. Like sick and bereavement leave, to ensure that the employee always has support from the organisation. However, an employee cannot accrue or carry forward their domestic violence leave as compared to sick or annual leave. If an employee is on annual leave and are in need of domestic violence leave, they should discuss it with the employer, as they would be entitled to take the domestic violence leave instead of their annual.
Through introducing this legislation, it will impact both the employers and the employees. From the employer's perspective, it gives them the opportunity to know what is going on in the home life of their employees and why their performance would not be as high as normal. Another impact on the employers is it would have the possibility that the company would not have the funds and resources to pay for the leave and cover the absent employee's role. Through the implementation of this legislation, there has been a huge positive impact on the employees' mental health, as through it is such a tough time, as it allows employees to feel supported by their employers. This will positively impact the employees' mental health when they return back into the workforce. Through the implementation of this legislation, there will be a huge positive impact on the employees' mental health, as through such a tough time it allows them to feel supported by the employers. Since they're getting the support they need now because of this legislation, victims aren't sacrificing pay over their health and safety. The legislation encourages victims to reach out for help rather than dealing with it alone. It shows the employers stand up for their employees through tough issues like this. Because of this, we are in favour of the employee, as they are getting the support they need now because of this legislation and aren't sacrificing pay over their safety. Thanks for listening.